Today we're going to talk about behavior-based feedback and what it actually sounds like. In our last video, we talked about how feedback is a system, and it's not just what you say, it's how it moves from you to the recipient, and then what happens next in their interpretation of what you said. And in this video, we're going to focus on what actually happens in that middle part, because people don't just act on feedback, they act on what they think the feedback means. And the space between what you said and what they heard, that's where most feedback starts to break down. But before we get into what to say differently, we need to understand how that interpretation is formed, because that is what's going to drive behavior. Here's how we're going to walk through this. We've got problem, in practice, the fix, right? We all want to know what the problem is, what does it look like when we do it better, and how do we go about fixing it so that we can be consistent as leaders in giving feedback that actually changes behavior. So we're going to walk through this in first what goes wrong, what does it look like in practice, and what do we do differently so that the work and the behavior actually looks different next time. So the problem. People don't act on feedback, they act on what they think it means. I know, it's kind of philosophical, right? But they really are acting on what they think it means. They're not just acting on what you said, they're acting on their interpretation of what you said. And if you leave a lot of room for interpretation, you're going to get a lot of varying results, because there is always space between what you said and what they heard. You know this. You've experienced it in professional and in your personal life. What is said is sometimes not what is heard. And that space is going to get filled by things like, people's experiences, their assumptions, and what they feel good has looked like in the past. And that right there is why two people can hear the exact same thing and walk away with completely different versions of what right looks like. The pattern. What you're seeing from your team is not random. It's a pattern, and it's doing what people think and believe is correct based on the information that they have. And remember, we are all only a sample size of one. We all only have our experiences, what we've seen, what we've heard, what we've experienced to pull from or to draw from. So our belief is going to get shaped by what's been reinforced in our world, what's been corrected on a daily basis in our world, and what's been left unclear. So if an interpretation isn't corrected clearly by you, if you see that there's a gap and you don't go correct it, it's not going to stay a one-off. It is going to become a pattern. And again, patterns are much more difficult to fix than singular moments in time. So you give the feedback. If you leave room for interpretation, they're going to base their behavior change on their interpretation of what you said. So you can't leave a lot of room for interpretation, because once they change their behavior, they're going to repeat that behavior because that's what they think right looks like. And once they start repeating that behavior, it becomes a pattern. The role of feedback. Feedback is supposed to reduce interpretation, right? Good feedback is anyway. It should name the behavior. It should define what good looks like, and it should make the change specific. That's the job, not just to respond to the behavior that happened, but to reduce how much people have to figure out on their own. And the way you do that is through focusing on the observable behavior that you saw in your team member. And then you name what actually happened, anchor that to a specific moment in time, and make what to do differently very clear. Because people aren't just executing tasks, they're making decisions all the way through all of the work that they're doing. Their behaviors are shaping how they're doing the work, and their decisions that they make on a daily basis are going to be based on what they think is expected. So if feedback stays general, people are left to decide what it means. And if feedback is too general, people are going to have, again, their own interpretations. But when you make your feedback behavior-based and you anchor it to a specific moment, it removes the guesswork. It tells them which behaviors to repeat, like which ones are actually very effective and are increasing our output or are increasing team camaraderie. Like what behaviors are the ones we want you to repeat? And then also, which behaviors do we need you to change and adjust? And that's going to be what shapes how the work actually gets done. So that's really where most feedback falls short. Leaders know that they need to be clear, but a lot of times they focus more on how they're saying something instead of getting specific about what needs to change. Better wording doesn't fix it. And most advice in the leadership space jumps too fast to, hey, say it this way. And it's kind of skipping a step there because it goes straight to the how to say it part. But if you don't understand as a leader that what you should be talking about is the behavior, the specific behavior that you want them to adjust, and you haven't defined that behavior clearly first to yourself so that you can communicate it accurately, phrasing it better isn't going to fix it. It's just going to make the same message that is kind of unclear sound more polished. And the issue isn't just how it's worded, it's whether or not the person knows what to do differently next time. And if that part isn't clear, nothing changes, promise. So instead of focusing on how to say it better, let's look at what actually changes when the behavior is clear and what it sounds like when it's not, because I want you to hear the difference. And I think these next 5 scenarios are really going to help cement this for you. At least I hope they do. What it should sound like. We've got scenario 1. This one is framed around execution. Vague. Tighten this up. That could mean 5 different things. Clear. You're jumping straight to content. Start with a short analysis section that explains the why. Now the issue is defined and the next step is obvious. It's the same request, but one leaves them deciding what to fix and the other tells them exactly what to add. We're not just correcting the work, we're shaping how the work gets done. Scenario 2, which is going to be framed around the level of detail. Vague. Simplify this. That doesn't tell them what to remove or what to prioritize. Clear. You're including everything. Start by leading with 2 to 3 key points. Now you've done more than just point out an issue. You've defined the level of expectation and given them a clear way to adjust. This scenario isn't just about the deliverable. It's about how your team member starts to decide and cement to themselves what actually matters in terms of what's the expectation and how should I be completing this task. That changes their behavior in how they execute on level of detail in their work. Scenario 3, interrupting. Vague. Try not to interrupt. That's broad and super easy to dismiss and also points to a pattern, but not what to do differently. Clear would sound like, when Sarah was sharing, you jumped in before she finished. Let her finish, then respond. Now you've anchored it to a moment and you've made change actionable. Remember, you're correcting behavior, not judging the person. And this isn't just about one moment, it's about how they are engaging in conversation with their team members. Scenario 4, this one's around participation. Vague. I need you to participate more. That doesn't tell them when or how, and now they have to decide what that means. Clear would sound like, in the last 2 meetings, you didn't weigh in on decisions you own. I want your recommendation before we move forward. Now, participation isn't general, it's tied to ownership. And you didn't just ask for more input, you clarified the expectation tied to their role. And now they know exactly when they're expected to speak up, what it should look like. It's not just about speaking up though, it's about how they are showing up and showing ownership. And finally, scenario 5, tone. Vague would be, that response felt a little short. First of all, that's subjective. Anytime you start feedback with that felt like, or it feels to me like, or it seemed, super subjective. We always want to be objective when we're giving feedback, because if it's subjective, it's super hard to act on. Clear would sound like this. The message was direct and read like a command. Going forward, add a line of context so that it doesn't read as abrupt. Now you've connected how it lands and what to adjust, and you're working to shape the impact, not the person. You need your adjustment to be clear, to be specific to the situation, because the goal is to help them refine their delivery without asking them to change their personality or change who they are. And it's not just about how it sounds, it's about how they shape the impact of their words that they're delivering to others. So across all of these scenarios, you are not just correcting what happened, you're shaping how it should happen next time. That's the difference. So notice what changed across all of these. It wasn't the tone, it wasn't the intention. What changed was how specific the message became. Each example moved from general to concrete, from something that could be interpreted to something your team member could act on. So we always want to make sure that it is specific, actionable, and behavior-based. We don't want it to be general, we don't want it to be unclear, and we don't want it to just be focused on output. I hope that that makes sense. I'm sure that it does. The framework. Strong feedback does three things. It names the behavior, it connects it to the impact or expectation, and it clarifies what to do next. So each of those strong examples that I just went through with you, they all named what actually happened, not a general pattern, but a specific moment in time. Then we connected it to why it mattered, either the expectation moving forward or the impact that it was having on others. And it made the next attempt at that same behavior or that same task very clear, so they knew exactly what you needed them to adjust moving forward. And that right there is what turns feedback, the message portion of feedback, into something usable. Not just wording, not just better wording, clear direction on what to do differently. I swear, people being vague is why so much work doesn't get done. And we're not doing it intentionally. It's just that we have not trained ourselves to really think about feedback having these different components in the message portion. So when we're giving the message, we always want to be clear because, as many people say, to be clear is to be kind. If they don't know what to do differently, the feedback wasn't clear enough. That's the standard. Not how it sounded, what actually changed. And if your feedback doesn't change how someone approaches the next attempt at that behavior or at that task, nothing actually shifted. Because feedback isn't just about what was said, it's about what gets done differently next time. What actually matters here? If your feedback isn't changing behavior, this is why. Because people act on what they believe is expected. So if your feedback is vague, people, as we've talked about, fill in those gaps. They decide what matters, they decide what to change, and those decisions are certainly not going to be consistent. And that's where you get that variation coming into play. And the role of your feedback, especially when you're a leader giving feedback to your team, you've got to remove the guesswork. Take as much of the guesswork out of it as possible. You name what happened, you connect it to what matters, and you explain what to do differently. And that's what makes it usable. If your people don't know what they should be doing differently, or if they're having to go to their team members and ask them for interpretation of your feedback, you're not being clear enough. Because people act on what they think is expected. Vague feedback is going to create guesswork for them, and clarity, and only clarity, is going to show them what to do differently. I'm going to leave you with the same quote I left you with in part 1 of this little 3-video series. Feedback isn't measured by what you say, but by what changes after. If your approach continues to stay the same, the behavior will too. And that right there is how those small issues turn into patterns. We've talked about this. Don't just focus on making your words prettier. Focus on making your feedback clear enough so that you can help change behavior effectively. Because what gets reinforced is what gets repeated. Like, that's the truth. Whatever you reinforce is going to get repeated. You probably heard what gets measured gets done, right? Well, in feedback, what you reinforce, that's what gets repeated, those behaviors. And that is what we're going to cover next in our 3rd video for this series. And if you are a leader who wants to continue to get clear, practical insights that are focused on actually changing behavior that leads to increased performance, consider subscribing. New videos are going to be released every week.